My name is Elena Marlowe. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 15 years, I have made my living writing words that the world believes came from someone else. I am a ghostwriter. If you've ever stood in an airport bookstore and picked up a hardcover with a gold sticker that said New York Times bestseller, there is a very real chance you've held my work in your hands. If you've ever underlined a quote from a memoir and thought, "This author is brilliant," there's a good chance I wrote that line at 2:14 a.m. with a mug of cold tea beside me and a deadline breathing down my neck. My job is to disappear, and I am very, very good at it. I know how to study a person's voice until I can mimic it better than they can. I know how to turn rambling, incoherent thoughts into crisp, powerful prose that makes readers cry on airplanes. I know how to build tension across 400 pages, how to pace a life story so it feels cinematic, how to make an ordinary memory feel like a pivotal moment in history. I know how to make someone sound brilliant. I have done it for 8 best-selling authors. My rates range between $100,000 and $250,000 per book. Last year, I earned more than $1 million writing stories that carry other people's names. I own a quiet condo in Brooklyn with exposed brick and tall windows that catch the afternoon light. I have no debt. I have a savings account that would make most people gasp. I drink expensive coffee and buy first editions of books I didn't write. And my family believes I have never accomplished anything. To them, I do some writing thing. To them, I am still figuring life out. To them, at 34 years old, I am the disappointing daughter of a great man. That great man is my father, Martin Marlowe. Former congressman, 12 years in office, cable news regular, public speaker, the kind of man who shakes hands like he's campaigning even at Thanksgiving dinner, the kind of man who speaks in complete paragraphs even when asking someone to pass the salt. Growing up, our house was a museum to his achievements. Framed newspaper clippings, award plaques, photos with governors and presidents, bookshelves lined with biographies of powerful men he admired and secretly believed he belonged beside. People came over and asked for his autograph. People told me, "You must be so proud to be his daughter." And I was. For a very long time, I was. Because when you grow up in the orbit of someone like that, you start to believe their light is the sun. You learn to stand just outside it, careful not to cast a shadow. My father has always loved telling stories, especially stories about himself. At dinner, he would recount moments from his political career with dramatic pauses and hand gestures. He knew how to hold a room. He knew how to make himself the hero of every anecdote, even when he was clearly the villain. My mother used to smile at him like he was performing on stage. I used to sit there, studying the way he built those stories, the way he rearranged facts to make them more flattering, the way he edited reality in real time. I didn't know then that I was learning the foundation of my future career. In our family mythology, my father is the self-made man, the brilliant one, the eloquent one, the one who rose from nothing through sheer intelligence and willpower. In that same mythology, I am the child who never quite measured up. I was quiet, observant, always reading, always writing. I won essay contests and short story competitions that my father never attended because he had important meetings. I graduated with honors. I went to a good college. I built a career most writers would kill for. But none of it counted. Because my work didn't have my name on it. Because I couldn't break NDAs to explain why my bank account looked the way it did. Because to the outside world, and especially to my family, I was just a woman who typed things on a laptop all day. A hobbyist. A drifter. Someone who hadn't done anything real. And for years, I let them believe that. I smiled through family dinners where my father would introduce me to guests as Elena. She's still trying to figure out what she wants to do. I nodded when relatives asked if I'd ever considered a stable job. I let my father tell stories about himself while I quietly constructed entire books for other people in my apartment 300 miles away. Because that was the deal, wasn't it? I would stay invisible professionally. And I would stay invisible personally. It worked until it didn't. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was finishing revisions on a celebrity memoir. My laptop was balanced on my knees. Rain tapped softly against my windows. I was deep inside someone else's voice, rewriting a childhood trauma into something more palatable. My phone buzzed. Dad. He doesn't call often. He prefers texts that sound like press releases. I answered. Elena, he said, his voice warm in that performative way he uses when he wants something. I need a little help. A little help. I remember smiling. Because for the first time in a long time, my father was asking me for something that I was actually good at. He told me he had been approached by a publisher to write a memoir, a political retrospective. His life, his legacy, his lessons for the next generation. They want it to sound literary, he said. Powerful, like those books you read. I was hoping you could guide me a bit. Guide him. I knew exactly what that meant. I had guided 8 authors to the bestseller list already. But this time, it was my father. And something inside me lit up in a way I didn't expect. This was it. This was the moment where he would finally see me. Not as the daughter who does some writing thing, but as the professional who could make him sound extraordinary. I told him yes before he even finished the sentence. I didn't ask about payment. I didn't ask about contracts. I didn't ask about credit. Because this wasn't a client. This was family. And for family, you don't charge. For family, you show up. I had no idea that this decision, the easiest yes I had ever given, would become the most expensive one of my life. The first voice memo from my father arrived at 6:12 a.m. I was still in bed when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I squinted at the screen and saw a 3-minute audio file labeled Chapter 1 Ideas. I smiled. I made coffee, wrapped myself in a blanket, and pressed play. What came through the speaker wasn't a chapter. It wasn't even an idea. It was my father pacing around what sounded like his kitchen, clearing his throat, muttering half-finished sentences, and occasionally saying things like, "Okay, so the beginning should sound important. You know, historical. Pause. Mention my first campaign. People love origin stories. Long pause. Make me sound reflective, but strong." Then the recording ended. I sat there staring at my phone. This was not unusual for me. Most of my clients couldn't write. That's why they hired me. But there was something strangely intimate about hearing my father struggle to form thoughts into sentences. I had grown up believing he was effortlessly articulate, the man who could command a room, the man who could speak without notes. And here he was, unable to finish a paragraph in his own kitchen. I opened a new Google Doc and titled it, Marlowe Memoir, Draft 1. I listened to the memo again. Then I began to write. I wrote about his childhood, about the small town he came from, about his first campaign office with folding chairs and cheap coffee. I wrote about ambition, grit, purpose, service. I built a narrative arc from fragments he hadn't even realized were there. By noon, I had 6 beautiful pages. I emailed them to him with a simple message. Is this the tone you're looking for? He replied 20 minutes later. Yes, exactly this. Just keep doing that. That was the moment I realized I wasn't guiding him. I was writing the entire book. Over the next 12 months, a rhythm formed. My father would send voice memos filled with vague thoughts, political anecdotes, and instructions like, "Make this sound smarter," or "I need to come across as visionary here." I would turn those into chapters. He never opened the document while I was working. He never left comments in the margins. He never rewrote a paragraph. Occasionally, he would send back edits that looked like this. "Can you add something here about leadership? This part needs to be more emotional. I don't like this story. Replace it with a better one." He wasn't editing. He was directing. And I was performing. 400 pages later, I had written the most polished, compelling work of my career. I knew his voice so well by then that I could anticipate what he would say before he said it. I could shape his life into a narrative that felt cinematic, heroic, thoughtful, wise. The kind of memoir that readers underline. The kind of memoir that publishers love. The kind of memoir that wins awards. Every time I finished a chapter, I felt a small, childish flicker of hope. He's going to read this and finally understand what I do. He's going to realize how hard this is. He's going to be proud of me. Instead, his responses were always the same. "Great, keep going." Not "This is incredible." Not "You're talented." Just "keep going." And I did. For free. Because this wasn't work. This was me finally contributing something valuable to my family in a way they could see. When the manuscript was finished, his publisher called him a genius. I know this because he told me, laughing. "They said it's one of the best political memoirs they've read in years," he said. "I guess I still have it." I waited for him to add, "We still have it." He didn't. The book went through copy edits, design, marketing, all the usual steps I'd seen 8 times before. Except this time, I wasn't CC'd on the emails. I wasn't in the meetings. I wasn't part of the process. I had handed over the manuscript, and just like that, I disappeared from it. My name appeared nowhere, except in a tiny line inside the acknowledgments. Research assistance by my daughter, Elena. Research assistance. I remember staring at that line for a long time. I told myself it didn't matter. This was still a victory. This was still my father's success, which somehow felt like mine too. I convinced myself that this was what being supportive looked like. That this was what family loyalty required. When the book released, it exploded. Interviews, reviews, magazine features, podcast appearances, a full book tour. I watched from my apartment as my father held up a book I had written and told audiences about the long, grueling writing process. He talked about late nights, about wrestling with sentences, about crafting the right words. I listened to him describe my labor as his. And still, I said nothing. Because somewhere inside me, a smaller voice whispered, "At least now, he knows what you're capable of." Then the book hit the New York Times bestseller list. He called me, ecstatic. "We did it," he said. "We?" I smiled into the phone. "Yes," I said, "you did." I thought that was the worst part. I thought the quiet erasure, the tiny acknowledgement, the interviews where he took credit for my work, that was the price I was paying for keeping the peace. I didn't know yet that the real damage wasn't in what he was claiming. It was in what he was about to say next. The NPR interview happened on a Thursday afternoon. I remember because I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store, engine off, listening to it live on my phone. I had planned to run inside for milk and bread. Instead, I sat there for 43 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching my reflection in the windshield as my life quietly shifted out of alignment. The host's voice was warm, curious, respectful. They spoke about the bestseller list, about the emotional depth of the book, about the prose that felt unexpectedly literary for a political memoir. I felt a small, private pride bloom in my chest. Then the host asked, casually, almost as an afterthought, "Your daughter is credited as a research assistant. Did she help with the writing at all?" There was a pause. A small one, barely noticeable to anyone else. But I heard it. My father chuckled lightly. "Oh, Elena, she helped with some typing and organizing notes. But the ideas, the structure, the actual writing, that's all me. Elena's still trying to figure out her path. She's never really accomplished anything on her own. Not like this." I didn't realize I had stopped breathing until my vision began to blur. My ears rang. My hands went numb on the steering wheel. He said it so easily, so casually, like it was a harmless, affectionate truth, like he was describing a slightly disappointing child who just hadn't found her way yet. Not a woman who had spent 12 months writing every word of the book he was being praised for. Not a professional who had built a career out of making people sound brilliant. Just his daughter, the one who hadn't done anything. I replayed the sentence in my head over and over. She's never really accomplished anything on her own. Something inside me cracked open. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly. Like glass giving way under pressure it had held for too long. I pulled over into an empty parking spot and turned off the radio. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stared at my phone like it had betrayed me. I thought about all the times I had stayed quiet at family dinners. All the times I had let him introduce me as the daughter who does some writing thing. All the times I had smiled and swallowed the urge to defend myself because it felt easier to stay invisible than to start a fight. I thought about the 12 months I had given him for free. The 400 pages. The nights I stayed up past 2 a.m. polishing paragraphs he would never even know how to write. And for the first time in 15 years of ghostwriting, I felt something I had never felt before. Not pride. Not patience. Ray. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there, completely still, as a very calm thought formed in my mind. I have receipts. I went home and opened my laptop. I clicked on the Google Doc, Marlowe Memoir Draft 1. Then I opened the revision history. A colorful timeline appeared on the right side of the screen. Hundreds of entries, each one tagged with my name, date stamps, time stamps, paragraph after paragraph materializing under my cursor over the course of a year. There was not a single, substantial edit from my father. Not one. I scrolled through it slowly, my heartbeat steady now, controlled. I opened my email. I searched memoir. Threads filled the screen. Emails from him saying, "Just write it however you think sounds best." Emails where he asked me to fix his incoherent voice memos. Emails where he admitted he didn't know how to structure chapters. I opened a folder on my desktop labeled voice memos. 47 audio files. 47 recordings of him saying things like, "You're better at this than I am," and "just make me sound smart." I listened to one at random. "Honestly, Elena, I don't even know what to say here. Just write something inspirational. You know how to do that." I sat back in my chair. A strange, almost detached clarity settled over me. For 15 years, I had been paid to disappear. To give other people my voice and let them wear it as their own. It was the job. But this time, it wasn't a contract. This time, it was my father. And he hadn't just taken my work. He had erased me while using it to prove how accomplished he was. And something in me refused to stay invisible anymore. I didn't call him. I didn't text him. I didn't confront him. I opened a blank document. And I started writing something with my own name on it for the first time in my career. The title came to me immediately. I ghostwrote my father's best-selling memoir, Here's Proof. I didn't publish it right away. That's the part people don't understand when they hear this story later. They imagine rage typing, emotional impulse, a dramatic midnight upload fueled by anger and adrenaline. It wasn't like that. It was quiet, methodical, almost clinical. The same way I write books. I treated the article like a manuscript. I outlined it first. What happened? What I did? What he said? What I could prove? No emotion, no accusations, just facts and documentation. I knew something most people don't. Truth, when presented calmly and with evidence, is far more devastating than outrage. I took screenshots of the Google Docs revision history, making sure the timestamps and my name were clearly visible. I cropped them carefully so they were readable but undeniable. I pulled emails where my father wrote things like, "I have no idea how to say this. Just write it for me." I transcribed sections of the voice memos where he told me to make him sound intelligent. I created side-by-side comparisons. His original unedited notes next to the polished paragraphs that appeared in the final book. It wasn't revenge. It was documentation. I wrote the article in the same tone I use when ghostwriting memoirs, calm, reflective, precise. I described the process. I described how ghostwriting works. I explained why I had agreed to do it for free. For family. And then, near the end, I included the quote from the NPR interview. She's never really accomplished anything on her own. I didn't add commentary. I didn't insult him. I didn't dramatize it. I just placed that sentence next to the evidence and let readers draw their own conclusions. When it was finished, I read it 3 times. Not as a daughter. As a professional. Was it airtight? Yes. Was it provable? Absolutely. Was it fair? Completely. My hands were steady when I created the Medium account under my real name. That part felt strange, seeing Elena Marlowe at the top of a piece of writing that was meant to be seen. I hovered over the publish button for a long time. Not because I was afraid of what would happen to him, but because I understood exactly what would happen to me. I would never be able to go back to being invisible. I clicked publish at 9:14 a.m. Then I closed my laptop and made coffee. For the first hour, nothing happened. I cleaned my apartment. I watered my plants. I tried to convince myself this was just another piece of writing floating in the endless ocean of the internet. At 10:27 a.m., my phone buzzed. A notification from Medium, 1,000 views. I blinked. 10 minutes later, 5,000 views. Then Twitter notifications. Then email alerts. Then texts from numbers I didn't recognize. By noon, the article had crossed 100,000 views. By 3 p.m., it had passed 1 million. Strangers were sharing screenshots of the evidence. Writers were commenting on the ethics of ghostwriting. Journalists were asking for interviews. Publishing insiders were tagging each other. And underneath it all, a single recurring phrase. She brought receipts. I didn't respond to anyone. I just watched. At 4:12 p.m., my father called. I stared at his name on the screen and let it ring. He called again. And again. Then my mother. Then my brother. Then my father again. I muted my phone. At 6:30 p.m., my email pinged with a message from a name I recognized immediately. His publisher. The subject line read, "Urgent." I opened it. Elena, we need to speak with you as soon as possible regarding the claims made in your article. Please confirm whether the documentation is authentic. I replied with one sentence. Everything in the article is verifiable. I attached a link to the shared Google Doc revision history. Then I closed my laptop. I slept better that night than I had in months. The next morning, the article hit 5 million views. News outlets picked it up, writers dissected it, lawyers commented on it. People who had never heard of my father's book were suddenly talking about it everywhere. And for the first time in my life, the story being told had my name on it. At 11:03 a.m., I got a text from my brother. What did you do? I didn't answer. At 1:45 p.m., a news clip started circulating online. My father, mid-book tour interview, being asked a simple question by a morning show host. Mr. Marlowe, can you describe your writing process for this book? He smiled confidently. Then he froze. He stumbled through an answer that made no sense. He couldn't explain how he structured the chapters. He couldn't describe how he developed the narrative arc. He couldn't recall the order of events he had supposedly written. He looked confused. Like someone being asked to describe a house they had never actually been inside. I watched the clip 3 times. Not with satisfaction. With a strange, hollow understanding. This was what happens when someone tries to live inside a story they didn't write. By evening, the publisher released a statement. We are investigating the authorship claims regarding Martin Marlowe's memoir. The comments under the statement were brutal. And for the first time since the NPR interview, I felt something other than anger. I felt relief. Because the truth was no longer something I was carrying alone. It was out in the open. And it was louder than anything my father could say to cover it. The official call from the publisher came 2 days later. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop closed, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I hadn't touched, when my phone rang from an unknown number. I knew who it was before I answered. Is this Elena Marlowe? Yes. This is Daniel Hirsch, legal counsel for Whitmore Publishing. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us. His voice was careful, professional, the tone of someone stepping onto thin ice. He didn't accuse me of anything. He didn't defend my father. He asked questions. Did I have access to the original manuscript files? Could I verify that the Google Doc belonged to me? Were the emails authentic? Were the voice recordings real? I answered calmly. Yes. 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 I forwarded everything while we were still on the call. There was a long pause on the other end as he opened the files. I could hear him scrolling, clicking, breathing. Then very quietly he said, I see. It wasn't dramatic. But something in his voice told me the outcome of this investigation had already been decided. He asked one more question. Did Martin Marlowe contribute any written sections to this manuscript? I thought about it. No, I said. He contributed voice memos and general ideas. I wrote every word that appears in the published book. Another pause. Thank you, Elena. We'll be in touch. That afternoon, the publisher issued a second statement. Pending investigation, distribution of Martin Marlowe's memoir has been suspended. The book was pulled from shelves. Online listings went dark. Pre-orders were canceled. Bookstores removed it from display tables. I watched it happen in real time, the way you watch a building being quietly dismantled brick by brick. My father called 12 times that day. I didn't answer. He left 3 voicemails. The first was angry. How could you do this to me? Do you realize what you've started? The second was desperate. Call me, we can fix this. We'll say it was collaborative, people will understand. The third was something else entirely. Elena, please. I deleted them without listening twice. Because I had already heard enough of his voice for a lifetime. By the end of the week, news broke that the publisher had requested the return of his $2 million advance due to breach of contract and misrepresentation of authorship. The interviews stopped. The book tour was canceled. Television appearances were quietly withdrawn. And suddenly, the man who had spent his life carefully controlling his narrative had no control over this one at all. My inbox filled with messages from journalists asking for comments, writers thanking me for exposing something they had experienced in different forms, strangers calling me brave. Brave. That word felt strange. I didn't feel brave. I felt done. Done being small, done being silent, done being the invisible scaffolding holding up someone else's reputation. Then my lawyer called. Not one I had hired, one who had read the article. Do you realize, she said, that you own the copyright to that manuscript? I blinked. What? You wrote it. There's no contract transferring rights. There's no payment record. Legally, that book belongs to you. I sat very still. All this time, I had thought I was exposing the truth. I hadn't realized I was also exposing a legal disaster. My father hadn't just taken credit for my work. He had published it under his name without owning it. And now there was proof. The publisher called again the next morning. This time, their tone was different. Elena, Daniel said carefully, we need to discuss intellectual property. That was the moment I understood something that made my stomach drop. This wasn't just about reputation anymore. This was about consequences. Real ones. The kind that can't be smoothed over with interviews and apologies. The kind that come with numbers attached. My father had built his entire identity on being the accomplished one. The successful one. The brilliant one. And now, every piece of evidence in front of powerful people was showing the opposite. Not only had he lied, he had needed me to make him look like he hadn't. And for the first time in my life, the imbalance between us wasn't emotional. It was documented. It was measurable. It was undeniable. That night, my brother finally sent a message that made me pause before deleting it. I didn't know, I swear. I didn't know you wrote all of it. I stared at the text for a long time. Because for the first time, someone in my family wasn't asking what I had done. They were realizing what he had. The legal meeting happened over video call. 3 small squares on my laptop screen. My lawyer. The publisher's legal counsel. It was me. No one mentioned my father's name at first. They talked about the manuscript. They talked about authorship, rights ownership, misrepresentation, breach of publishing contract. They spoke like surgeons discussing an X-ray. Precise, detached, clinical. And for the first time, my father wasn't the center of the conversation. The work was. My work. Elena, my lawyer said gently, because there was no written agreement transferring copyright, and because you were not compensated, you are the legal author of record. The publisher is currently in possession of a book they do not legally have the rights to sell. I swallowed. So what happens now? Daniel from the publisher answered. We have 2 options. 1, we recall all copies permanently, settle with Mr. Marlowe, and bury this. 2, we correct authorship publicly, renegotiate rights with you, and re-release the book under your name. The room went very quiet. I hadn't thought this far ahead. I hadn't imagined a future where the book existed without him attached to it. The idea felt surreal, like seeing a painting without the wrong signature on the corner. My lawyer spoke carefully. There is also the matter of damages. Mr. Marlowe received a $2 million advance under false pretenses. The publisher will pursue recovery. Elena, you may also be entitled to compensation as the rightful author. I leaned back in my chair. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. This was never supposed to be a money fight. This was supposed to be a truth fight. But truth, apparently, comes with invoices. Then Daniel said something that changed the temperature of the call. There's one more issue. Mr. Marlowe has gone on record in multiple interviews claiming sole authorship. Those statements are now provably false. That exposes him to fraud liability. Fraud. I closed my eyes. Because that word was heavier than everything else. Reputation damage can be repaired. Fraud follows you forever. After the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. Then my phone rang. This time, it was my mother. I hadn't heard her voice in months. Elena, she said, already crying, please, you have to stop this. Your father is falling apart. I didn't respond. She kept talking. He hasn't slept. He won't eat. He says you're trying to destroy him. I finally spoke. I'm not doing anything, Mom. I showed the truth. Everything happening now is because of what he did. That's still your father. And I'm still his daughter, I said quietly. He didn't seem to remember that on NPR. She went silent. Then, softly, he says you're overreacting, that you embarrassed him over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. 12 months of writing, hundreds of hours of work, years of dismissal, public humiliation. A misunderstanding. I felt something inside me go very still. No, I said. He embarrassed himself. She started crying harder. You're supposed to protect family. I almost laughed. Because for 15 years, that's exactly what I had been doing. Protecting him. By staying invisible. By letting him take credit. By swallowing every insult because family. I'm done protecting him, I said. I'm protecting myself now. She hung up without saying goodbye. That evening, news broke that my father had canceled all remaining media appearances due to health reasons. But I knew the real reason. He couldn't answer questions about a book he hadn't written. And the questions were coming. Reporters had begun asking him to read passages aloud, to explain writing choices, to describe his drafting process. He stumbled. He deflected. He got defensive. And every clip went viral. The internet wasn't mocking me anymore. They were dissecting him. For the first time in my life, people were seeing the man I had known my whole life. Not the polished version. The real one. That night, my brother called. Not a text. A call. Elena, he said, voice shaky, is it true? You wrote the whole thing. Yes. A long pause. I always thought Dad was just hard on you because he wanted you to do more. I didn't realize you were already doing more than anyone. I didn't know what to say to that. Because it wasn't an apology. It was a realization. And sometimes, that's even heavier. Then he said something that caught me off guard. He's scared. Of what? That if people know you wrote the book, they'll realize he's not who he says he is. I stared at the wall. Because that was the part that hurt the most. This had never been about the book. It was about the image. And for the first time, that image had a crack in it big enough for everyone to see through. The first formal demand letter went out on a Monday morning. Not from me. From the publisher. It was addressed to my father and copied to his legal team. Subject line: breach of contract and misrepresentation of authorship. I didn't see the letter, but my lawyer summarized it for me. They were requesting immediate repayment of the $2 million advance. They were suspending all royalty payments. They were reserving the right to pursue additional damages depending on the outcome of the investigation. And they were doing something even more damaging. They were asking him to provide proof that he had written the book. Proof he didn't have. Because I did. By noon, my father's legal team had contacted mine. They wanted a private call. They wanted to resolve this quietly. My lawyer asked me a simple question. Do you want to settle, or do you want the record corrected publicly? I didn't hesitate. Publicly. Because quiet resolutions were how this had survived for 15 years. Behind closed doors, in private conversations, in family-only narratives where the truth could be reshaped into something more comfortable. No. This time, the truth needed light. The call happened that afternoon. My father wasn't on it. Just his attorney. He sounded exhausted. Ms. Marlowe, he began, my client acknowledges that you provided significant editorial assistance on the manuscript. I cut in. I wrote the book. A pause. Yes, that is what you're alleging. I forwarded him the revision history file while we were speaking. He went quiet for almost a full minute. When he came back, his tone had changed. We would like to propose a settlement. I said nothing. He continued. My client is willing to publicly acknowledge your role as co-author and issue a statement clarifying the collaborative nature of the project. In exchange, we ask that you refrain from further public commentary and withdraw any claims to sole authorship. Co-author. Collaborative. I almost admired the creativity. 15 years of minimizing my work had trained them to think I would accept being made smaller. Again. I'm not a co-author, I said calmly. I'm the author. The silence on the line was thick. Then he tried a different angle. Think about what this is doing to your family, your father's health, your mother, your brother. There it was. The emotional currency they had always used when facts failed. I felt strangely detached listening to it now. Did my father think about my health? I asked, when he told the world I'd never accomplished anything. He didn't answer. Because there was no argument left. Only consequences. The publisher moved faster after that call. They issued a public statement. Whitmore Publishing is conducting a formal review of authorship regarding Martin Marlowe's memoir. Pending verification, future editions are suspended. Future editions. Not canceled. Suspended. They were preparing for something. That evening, I got an email from Daniel. If authorship is formally transferred to you, would you consider allowing us to republish the book under your name? I stared at the screen for a long time. The idea felt impossible. The book had his face on the cover, his name in bold letters, his reputation tied into every chapter. But the words inside, those were mine. I hadn't realized until now how much of myself I had poured into that manuscript. Not just his stories. My structure, my voice, my craft, my fingerprints in every paragraph. For the first time, I wondered what it would look like with my name on it instead. Not as revenge, but as restoration. Then my phone buzzed with a notification. A news alert. Congressman Martin Marlowe struggles to answer questions about his book in live interview. I didn't watch it. I didn't need to. Because I already knew what had happened. They asked him about a chapter. He couldn't explain how he wrote it. They asked about a phrase. He didn't recognize it. They asked about his writing routine. He stumbled. And the internet did what the internet does. Clips, analysis, side-by-side comparisons. People weren't debating whether I wrote the book anymore. They were asking how he had ever convinced anyone that he could. That night, my father finally sent a text. Not angry, not demanding. Just 3 words. Call me, please. I stared at it for a long time. Because for the first time in my life, he wasn't commanding. He was asking. And I realized something uncomfortable. This was the first time he needed me. Not for my work, but for mercy. The next morning, my phone rang again. It was my father. I hesitated before answering. 15 years of helping him at my expense flashed in my mind. All the times I'd stayed silent to protect him, to protect the image of a man who had never once protected me. Elena, he said, voice low, unsteady. Can we talk just for 5 minutes? I let the call go to speaker. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Everyone's calling me a fraud. The publisher, the reporters, your brother, even my old colleagues. I don't know how to fix this. I stayed quiet. Did you really write the whole book? He asked finally. Yes, I said, simple, truthful, not cruel. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing heavily. I thought I was helping. I thought the book would make us proud, that I could finally show the world what I've done. By taking credit for my work, I said, letting the words hang. That's how you showed the world. His sigh was heavy, almost defeated. I never thought about it that way. I was proud of you, you know, in my own way. I just never told anyone, never you either. I swallowed. Years of resentment and disbelief clawed at me. Pride isn't a license to steal someone else's work. He was quiet, then quietly, almost a whisper. What do you want from me? I didn't answer immediately because I wasn't sure. Justice, recognition, revenge, closure. I want the truth to matter, I finally said. Everything else we'll see. He didn't argue. We hung up, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to rush to fix him. Because I realized 15 years of protecting him had cost me my own voice. Now I could speak freely. That afternoon, an email arrived from the publisher. Elena, please review the final draft for the authorship statement. Once approved, we will issue a public correction and begin transfer of rights to your name. I stared at the screen. The book would now bear my name. The work I had created, the craft I had poured into every page, would finally be acknowledged. It felt surreal, like stepping into sunlight after years in shadow. But even as relief surged, a quiet unease lingered. My father's career, reputation, and identity were crumbling. He had never considered the cost of truth before. Would he rebuild? Or would he spend the rest of his life blaming me, as he always blamed the world? I didn't know. All I knew was that I could finally reclaim myself. That evening, I began drafting a statement for Medium. I would share everything. Every draft, every revision, every email proving the truth. I hesitated before sending. 15 years of silence felt heavy in my fingers. Then I pressed publish. Within minutes, the article began to circulate. Screenshots of emails, Google Doc revision histories, side-by-side comparisons of first drafts and final versions. Everything was there. I leaned back in my chair and waited. Because the storm I had unleashed would not just change how the world saw him. It would change how my family saw me. And I had no idea which way it would go first. The first comments started popping up on the article. This is incredible. I can't believe he took credit for this. Finally, the real author gets recognition. Is it really true he wrote the whole thing? Proof looks solid. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating. I had shown the receipts. But the fallout, that had only just begun. By the next morning, the story had gone viral. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold, scrolling through articles, tweets, and videos. Every outlet from NPR to BuzzFeed had picked up the story. Headlines screamed. Congressman caught faking memoir. Ghostwriter speaks out. The man who claimed glory is exposed by his own son. And amidst the chaos, one thing was clear. The world now knew the truth. The publisher called again, urgency in their tone. Elena, we've received overwhelming support for your authorship claim. They're ready to finalize the rights transfer. Your name will appear on the cover of every future edition. I leaned back, letting the weight of the moment sink in. 15 years of work, of invisible labor, of sacrifices no one noticed, finally acknowledged. But recognition came with a price. Messages from family poured in. My father's lawyer, my mother, even distant relatives, some apologetic, some outraged, some trying to bargain. Most chilling was my father himself. No apology, just a text. You've ruined everything. How could you do this to me? I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on my Medium article, which continued to gain traction. Readers shared their own stories of hidden labor, unrecognized effort, and betrayal. Comments numbered in the tens of thousands. People were relating. People were listening. Then came the live interviews. News anchors asked me about the moral of the story, the cost of speaking out, the ethics of ghostwriting. I answered with calm precision, each word a reclamation of my own narrative. And yet, even as victory settled around me, a quiet tension lingered. The publisher reminded me, Martin's team could appeal the findings, possibly sue for defamation. The book's removal from shelves was temporary pending final decisions. I realized that justice, in the eyes of the law, was not instantaneous. Recognition didn't erase the years of exploitation or the emotional scars of being belittled by my own father. At night, I stared at the stack of drafts and documents, reminders of every sleepless night, every rewritten chapter, every subtle compromise I'd made to please him. I had proven my authorship. I had shown the receipts. I had won acknowledgement. But would the world, or my family, ever understand the personal cost behind the words? And then there was another question, one I hadn't dared ask myself until now. Now that my father's empire of lies was collapsing, what would become of him? The thought gnawed at me, because though I had reclaimed my work, the story wasn't fully over. Some battles had legal resolutions, some had public vindication. But some lingered in quiet rooms, in unspoken words, in fractured family ties. And as I prepared for the next round of interviews, the next wave of public scrutiny, I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer invisible, and the world would not let me be. Yet in the back of my mind, a subtle unease remained. Could I ever forgive? Could I ever allow him back into my life? For now, the question remained unanswered, a quiet pulse beneath the roar of the public victory. And in that tension, the next chapter of our story, the reckoning, the fallout, the ultimate consequences, was quietly waiting to unfold. The days that followed were a blur of interviews, articles, and calls from publishers wanting to reissue the memoir under my name. Each step was surreal. A book I had poured my heart into for over a year, finally acknowledged as mine. Every word, every sentence, every meticulously crafted paragraph bore my name at last. The publisher confirmed the transfer of rights, the royalties redirected, and the corrected editions scheduled for release. Social media exploded with support, validation pouring in from strangers, colleagues, and even other ghostwriters who had long felt invisible. For the first time, I didn't just feel seen, I felt vindicated. And yet, victory didn't feel simple. My father was publicly humiliated. His interviews stumbled, his colleagues questioned his credibility, and every past accolade now seemed tainted. He had lost not just a book, but his carefully curated image of himself. I knew some might say revenge had driven my actions, but the truth was simpler. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted my work to matter. And finally, it did. We didn't reconcile. Not yet. Not fully. He sent emails, texts, even letters, some tinged with apology, most still laced with denial and blame. I read them but didn't reply. My healing, would not come from his acknowledgement. It would come from reclaiming my own voice and my own story. One evening, alone in my apartment, I opened the final email from Daniel, the publisher. "Elena, the book is yours. Every future edition, every adaptation, every future opportunity, it's all in your hands. Congratulations." I leaned back and closed my eyes. 15 years of silent labor, of unacknowledged nights, of invisible creativity, it all culminated here. My hands, which had typed every word, finally held the power I had earned. And yet, a quiet question lingered in my mind. Could I ever forgive my father? Could I allow him back into my life after the years of lies and minimization? Or was this a wound too deep, one that even truth and justice could not heal? I didn't have the answer yet, and that uncertainty, it was strangely freeing. Because for the first time, I realized I didn't need his validation. My work, my talent, my life, those were enough. I poured a glass of wine, set it beside the glowing laptop showing the viral article, and stared out at the city skyline. The story I had lived, the battle I had fought, and the justice I had claimed, it was complete. But somewhere in the shadows, a subtle, unanswered question remained, a quiet pulse that hinted at new challenges, new confrontations, maybe even new revelations waiting just beyond the horizon. I smiled, because for the first time in my life, I was finally free. And the world knew it.